In today's episode, I want to talk about productivity, in specific about the modern notion that the more you get done in a day and the faster you work on your projects, the more productive you were. Because when it comes to actually being productive on the projects that we're pursuing and the goals that we have in life, is it really the case that the faster we work, the better? Or could it be the case that by slowing down, we could actually yield higher results and produce better quality work? Which is why today I want to take a look back at the way that the Renaissance period viewed productivity, because it was wildly different to the way that we view it today. And that period was able to produce the great minds of Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, William Shakespeare, and Galileo Galilei. And so it's fair to say that that period was an extremely productive period, but they almost put no value on mere speed and action when it came to becoming more productive. And so in this video, we're going to break it down into 3 parts, with part 1 being what is the slow life Renaissance productive philosophy, part 2 being what's taking away from us being able to live the slow life today, and part 3 being how we can cultivate in a practical way a bit more of the slow life in our own day-to-day life. With that said, let's get started with part 1, which is what is the slow life? In order to understand the slow life philosophy, we first need to take a look at what birthed the Renaissance period to begin with. The Renaissance period was a reaction to the period that came before, which was the medieval ages. And the Renaissance viewed the medieval times as a period of mass stagnation and not a very productive time. However, their reaction to that was not to all of a sudden start doing more, but they rather thought that the reason the medieval time wasn't productive was because they spent too much time in action and not enough time in contemplation. And so the Renaissance period started putting much more of an emphasis on reading widely, spending more time in contemplation, and following your curiosity. As one of the early thinkers of the Renaissance said, they hate what they do not understand, and they call useless what they are too lazy to pursue. And you also had Leonardo da Vinci, who called curiosity la migliore guida, the best guide. And so what those Renaissance thinkers like Da Vinci and Petrarch were getting at is that what you produce is a direct correlation of what you were able to absorb. As they would look at a great work of art about 2 young lovers as not something that someone woke up and started producing, but rather a reaction to an artist who was able to spend enough time in contemplation on love, on people, on relationships, on connection, and then have a great idea for that painting. As they were saying that what is more important in creating a business? Is it how hard you work on the business, how many hours you put into the business to get it started? Or is it how good was the idea for the business in the first place? How many hours of contemplation did you put in before launching this business? How much knowledge were you able to acquire about this specific industry, about people, about the world, to see how it could connect and what gaps they were in the market for you to exploit? The Renaissance period was saying that 90% of the hard work that goes into producing high quality work is done through thinking, through contemplation, as they viewed productivity as a bit of a bow and arrow, in that you need to aim and target at something, but before you shoot the bow and arrow at that target, you need to absorb a certain amount of information, which would put tension on that bow, tension on that arrow, which could then shoot it forward to achieve your target. It's a similar concept that Ernest Hemingway said, where Ernest Hemingway said, when writing a book, you should write when you have something to say, not before, and not too damn much after. It's getting at the point that the Renaissance got at, which is that the actual active, actionable work you do should be the easy part, and that the hard part of productivity should be focusing for a long time on absorbing information, slowing down your life, being present, and spending time in contemplation. And so that's really the heart of the Renaissance slow life philosophy, that in order to produce better quality work, in order to produce work that genuinely moves the needle forward, brings in more respect for you, and is of a much higher value, you can only do that by spending more time in contemplation, not less. You should put less focus on action and more focus on following your curiosity and seeing where that may lead you. And in order to see how this philosophy has been able to work in different time periods, in different industries, and be a great way to become more productive and more creative in your productivity, we're going to look at 3 different figures from 3 different centuries in 3 different industries to show how wildly successful this slow life philosophy can be. With those 3 figures being Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the United States in the 18th century, Aristotle Onassis, one of the most successful businessmen in history in the 20th century, and in the 21st century we're going to look at the Olympic gold medalist skier Eileen Gu, and look at how each of these 3 figures have been able to take ideals from this Renaissance slow life productivity philosophy and use it in their own industries to achieve a competitive advantage over everybody else and yield much higher returns while actually putting in less time in action and more time in contemplation. With the first one we're going to look at being Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson was renowned to read constantly, with some reports suggesting that on some days he would read over 16 hours that day, with his average day consisting of at least 5 to 6 hours of reading. Now, for someone who was incredibly productive, incredibly hardworking, and yielded incredibly high results with his work, that is a lot of time to spend sitting down, contemplating life, contemplating knowledge, and following his curiosity. Except he viewed that as his advantage, in that if he wanted to create a republic in the United States and he didn't spend the time reading books from John Locke, studying up on philosophy, society, history, politics, then they would have rushed into a war, they would have founded a country without any real deep sense of principles. And that what actually made the United States a success at that time in becoming its own republic was not how hard they worked once they went to war against England, once they decided to become their own country, but it was the ideas that percolated in the minds of each of the founders beforehand, which allowed them to create a nation and create a society that had never been tried before that could be radically successful. And so then that shows how it worked for Thomas Jefferson, but now let's pivot and look at how it worked for Aristotle Onassis in the shipping industry. Now, Aristotle Onassis was incredibly famous for spending a lot of time on his yacht. In particular, he would spend time on his yacht almost every morning, or would be on his own private jet every morning, reading for 6 hours at every single start of the day. And what he was reading for those 6 hours was every single shipping paper that he could get his hand on. He would read every newspaper in 6 or 7 different languages every day so that he had a complete bird's eye view of the industry that he was working in. He would read up on all the politics, he would read up on all of the market news as well, so that he could see how it was all connecting and that he knew every single inch and every detail of what was happening in the industry that he was working in. Rather than his competition, who would quickly glance through the papers and then get straight to work trying to achieve whatever it was they were trying to achieve, he was spending more time in contemplation and viewing that as his competitive advantage. And so while he led the entire shipping industry and all of his competition thought they had to work harder and spend more time in action in order to topple his reign, he actually spent less time in action, and that was his competitive advantage. He wasn't rushing through his life being reactive, he was slowing things down and contemplating every single detail so that when he finally did act, that action was well targeted, well aimed, and could exploit whatever it was he was looking to exploit and succeed with his company. And on top of that, in a modern day example in Eileen Gu, she's someone who is a full-time student at Stanford, a full-time model on top of being a full-time Olympic gold medalist skier. Now, that is taking a lot of time away from being on the snow, and she even says herself she's really on the snow between 2 or 3 days a week, whereas a lot of her competition, they're on the snow almost every day, if not 5 or 6 days a week. Yet, how is she able to yield such high results in her competition and beat these people when they're spending more time in practice? Well, she actually credits the time away from the ski slopes as what's giving her an advantage over her competition. Because she believes that by being a full-time student, by being a full-time model, and exploring and following her curiosity in every way that it goes, it allows her brain to rest, it allows her brain to slow down from skiing, and then she gets to come into practice with a fresh perspective. And she's able to think about tricks for a longer time. Whereas her competition will train all day and then have 2 hours to contemplate their tricks before bed and then wake up and do the same thing. She's spending hours or days between practices thinking about her tricks, thinking about what she could improve, what she could tweak, or coming up with ways to push the boundaries in what she's doing on the snow slopes. And what that's able to do is give her a different perspective, a different way of thinking about the industry she's in, so she's able to approach her practice, she's able to approach her action in a way that is targeted much more precise and targeted much more intentional than just being in the weeds constantly. And I'm sure that's something we can all relate to, where when you're focused on something for so long and you're not giving your mind a rest from it, you can actually get clouded in your vision. And that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is to slow down, take a deep breath, spend more time thinking about it, gestating on it, following your curiosity in different ways, and then pulling from those ways into what it is that you're doing. And so that really wraps up the understanding of the slow life philosophy and what makes it such a unique perspective on productivity and a way that can definitely yield higher, deeper, and more quality results than by merely just putting in hours and hours on end on the action side of things, but not putting in enough effort in thinking about it. But now let's switch to part 2 of this episode, which is what's pulling us away from being able to cultivate this slow life in today's world. And there are the obvious examples of cell phones and iPads and email and text messages, but I actually want to dig a little deeper than that. Because when you think back of some of the great figures like Aristotle Onassis or Thomas Jefferson or Isaac Newton or Leonardo da Vinci, I'm sure they had lots of people who were asking for their attention too. I'm sure they had lots of letters sent to them, lots of requests for dinners, for lunches, to meet up, to have conversations. Yet they were able to slow down those distractions, put a blinder on, and focus deeply on what it was they were doing in following their curiosity and having time alone to think slowly and deeply about a subject. And so what I was able to do here is pull from Thomas Jefferson's technique, which was he would have people around for dinner, and he would push all of his meetings and communication to late in the afternoon, to dinner time, and that way he was able to start each day fresh, with a focused mind, be able to read for hours, contemplate the hard thoughts, the hard problems that he needed to solve in order to fulfill the projects he was working on, and then spend some hours actually working on that project too, and using that contemplative time to then spur and inspire his action. But then after that, once that work was complete, he could meet these people, he could have communication, he could allow his brain to become a little bit more scattered and start task switching a little bit more. And so in the modern world, what we can do is actually take those distractions of email, text messages, social media, and all we can do is still get around to it because it's necessary for our work, it's necessary to keep up with our friends in today's world. Let's just admit it, you can't really avoid technology and social media. But you can box it into a time within your day after you've given yourself time to be contemplative, time to be solely focused, time where your brain is not task switching. So that maybe that time is after 1 p.m. or after 2 p.m. You can open up the phone, open up your email, get it back down to inbox 0, whatever it may be. You can start task switching after that point, but it's just about finding time before that to actually be in a contemplative state. And I think too many people today talk about, oh, in order to be more productive, in order to feel a little bit more calm and slow down our lives, we need to just give up on social media. At the end of the day, that's virtually impossible. Some of us have jobs that require us to be switched on and responding to emails. And so it's really just about carving out the right time to do it. And if a former US president like Thomas Jefferson, or the man who basically invented physics like Isaac Newton, can find the time to switch off from distractions, to actually be contemplative, and to work towards their project in a slow, deep manner, I'm sure we can all figure out that time as well. Which leads me to part 3, which is a simple protocol to cultivate a slow life in our lives today. Now, for a lot of us, we have other commitments. We may have a day job, and what we're working on is something on the side. It's a project on the side, and we may think, I don't have the time to spend 6 hours a day reading like Thomas Jefferson. I don't have the freedom to be able to spend the first 4 hours of every day reading up all the newspapers around the world on the industry that I want to work in, or on the project I'm working towards, like Aristotle Onassis. But you at least do have some time. You at least have the commute to work. You at least have time before, during, or right after breakfast. And it's more important to do this in the morning, but to be contemplative. And if all you can achieve is 30 minutes or 1 hour or 90 minutes of contemplative time to read, to follow your curiosity, to be calm, and start the day slow without task switching, that's what you should do. And if you do have more time, then fantastic. But it's just about carving out time to be contemplative right at the beginning of the day, when your brain is fresh, when it's not scattered, you haven't been task switching. And it's important that if you do need to start opening email and social media for your work at 9 or 10 a.m., then at least beforehand you had time to be slow and contemplative. And that's really what this whole philosophy is all about. It's about following your intellectual curiosity, and whatever that inspires you to then work towards, whether that's you're reading so much on philosophy and psychiatry and trying to understand the human condition, and that inspires you to want to write a novel or write a book or start a YouTube channel like I'm doing now, then you can follow that inspiration after you've been inspired by it from this contemplative time in the morning. But if you just figure out a way to carve out 30 minutes or an hour every morning to be contemplative, to be a little slow, to come to life rather than be reactive to life, the rest of your work, the rest of your life will feel a lot more fulfilling. And if you do have more time, then fantastic. But for most of us, that's all the time that we have. And that if we do get inspired from that to pursue a project, then we can work on that later in the afternoon, or we can work on that on the weekend, but it's just about having at least 30 minutes every morning to be contemplative. And I see a lot of videos out there on productivity systems that is all about, oh, you need 3 or 4 hours for this, when a lot of us honestly don't have the time. But you at least have 30 minutes. If you usually wake up at 6:30, you can wake up at 6 and spend that first 30 minutes to do that. But it's all about slowing down your mind, and that is the key to the slow life. And it's truly fascinating how if you just carve out that time beforehand, how much that will then impact the rest of the day. And that's what the thinkers like Da Vinci were talking about there, where they're saying if you do follow your curiosity, if it is the perfect guide, because by following it for just a little moment of time, 30 minutes or 1 hour, it will guide the rest of your day. It will slow down the world around you so that you can have more unique ideas, deeper ideas, and yield higher returns and produce higher quality work. But with that said, let me know your thoughts on this video or this podcast if you're listening to this in audio form. Let me know your thoughts on this productivity system. Do you think it will work for you? Do you think it won't? And also let me know what you'd like me to talk about in the future as well. If you liked the video, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, or leave a review if you're listening to this on a podcast app. And until next time, take care.